Delivering this week's must-watch workplace storylines, this is Bloomberg Law's Punching In, for those of you listening in Washington and across the globe.
Hey folks, thanks for punching in with us. We have a guest on the podcast today. Keisha-Ann Gray is a partner at Proskauer in New York. She was formerly an assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of New York. She now works, most of her work is primarily in litigation now in the workplace and employment law space, lots of sexual harassment and discrimination cases. And she also advises big corporations, big businesses, and does investigations as well on those same issues. Keisha-Ann, how are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for joining me. So I wanted to start off first by jumping into, I've talked with lots of employment discrimination attorneys that represent big organizations. And a lot of what they say when you ask what companies are doing to sort of beef up, especially post-litigation and things like that, is that they're doing additional training. But I wanted to ask you beyond that, since the sort of the inception of the Me Too movement and the Harvey Weinstein case and all that, have you seen a difference in sort of how companies are approaching sexual harassment, discrimination issues in the workplace?
I absolutely have. Training obviously is one. In-person training versus non-in-person training has been ramped up a lot more, requiring or requesting that people who train are actually litigators, trial attorneys who have dealt with these matters and these issues so they can truly communicate to those being trained the hazards of inappropriate workplace conduct. So that's kind of in the bucket of training that I have seen. Mm-hmm. I've also seen companies become more proactive instead of reactive, right, and engage organizations as well as law firms to do workplace assessments or climate studies ahead of potentially getting a concern or a complaint related to Me Too. I've also seen an increase and a true focus on diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. I can tell you as a litigator that harassment allegations, harassment situations are put further down when you have true diversity and inclusion in areas of power within an organization. So there has been a huge focus now on making sure that those who are in positions of power truly do represent the community.
It's interesting that you mentioned it sounds like a sort of audit almost. Can you sort of describe, in a real life example would be good as well, but a situation where a company, acted ahead of time to sort of do such an audit of their own processes and procedures in place and how they then handled the findings?
I can tell you that it can be done various ways. Usually the best way to do it is to have a third party do it, not someone within the organization. So to hire an organization that does audit, mm-hmm, to have legal counsel do an audit. What would happen is an organization or someone would come in and basically take a cross-section of the population within the organization or within a unit of the organization, mm-hmm, what have you, however you want to split it up.
And you mean a survey?
Individuals. It could be a survey. It could start with a survey. It could start with a written survey. I'm a big believer that it's face-to-face communication and contact that really gets the most candid answers versus a survey. Mm-hmm. Because someone can say something to you and their body language can reflect that that's not really what they mean. And that in and of itself is important information for an organization to know that something's not quite right.
I'd also like to ask you about litigation a bit. We actually looked at this issue a while back, sort of again at the inception of the Me Too movement. At that point in time, and we were looking at EEOC complaints specifically, not necessarily federal court filings. But at that point in time, we didn't really notice any sort of significant, in terms of data, uptick in the number of cases filed. But we've done more reporting recently that show that the EEOC case filings, at least where one can also lodge sexual harassment or other kinds of workplace discrimination complaints to the EEOC, we've seen an uptick more recently. So can you talk about sort of, not the rates, but in litigation, are you noticing a difference in how litigation proceeds in this climate, given the Me Too movement and Christine Blasey Ford is having an effect on the Supreme Court nomination? Are you noticing litigation strategies changing and how people approach the issue general during litigation?
Most organizations would prefer not to have allegations brought against them in the public. And because it's now commonplace for allegations, sometimes for the first time for an organization to hear about an allegation, to hear about it in public and not necessarily through HR or through a lawyer letter, but in public, organizations are a lot more careful about thinking through whether or not it is worth it to actually litigate, or if it is better to try to resolve it in a manner that is amicable and workable for all sides.
Right.
I can tell you though that with the push for non-confidentiality or anti-confidentiality, or there being a ban on confidentiality in agreements, it will create more than likely higher instances of actual litigations.
Okay.
Because for many organizations, one of the most important things, or when they consider whether or not they go forward with a litigation, is will this be something that will be able to not have to be played out in public?
Right.
Can this be, if we agree to this, will we be able to put this behind us? And that's what confidentiality often brings for organizations. They can handle a situation, address it, learn from it, make sure it doesn't happen again, hopefully, and put it behind them.
All right, that was a very enlightening conversation with Keisha-Ann, and that is it for this week, folks. Thanks for punching in for the Labor Desk Monday Morning Musings, as always. And for more coverage, be sure to check out our website where the Punching In column is hosted. That's news.bloomberglaw.com. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hassan Kanu. See you next week.